Hello, this is Brian Rowe with Mythic MTG Tech number 39. I'm doing a modern Infect deck tech. This is one that was requested by one of the viewers here on YouTube. This deck tech really is designed for people getting ready for the Pro Tour qualifiers, which are coming up currently. The basic idea behind the goal is to give your opponent 10 poison counters as quickly as possible. The deck list that I've decided to focus on is a deck list that was used this last year at Grand Prix to get 13th place. This is a little bit more of a control, slower strategy. There are some things you can do to speed this up a bit, but it really has a nice addition to it in that it's got Exalted from the Noble Hierarch and from the Cathedral of War. This deck has jumped in price a bit recently. It's about a $400 to $500 deck currently, mostly because the fetch lands and Thoughtseize have over doubled in the last month. Thoughtseize was about a $30 card and is going for about $65 or so right now. If you want to cut down on the cost of this deck, I would definitely look at Inquisition of Kozilek, which is between $5 and $10 right now, which will save you about $200, and I actually really like adding Gemstone Mines. This particular list has two, but even 3 or 4 Gemstone Mines are extremely good, and they cut down on the cost of the lands. They also often give you a little more flexibility. One of the complaints I've heard about this deck is that as it's running 3 colors, it can be a bit tough to get all your colors. Gemstone Mine will fix that, and games are often over by turn 4. So the Gemstone Mine losing counters is really not a drawback to it and a way to save some money on this deck. Let's look at the cards here. They really fall into 3 different categories. We've got your Infect creatures over here on the left, your Blighted Agent, Glistener Elf, Plague Stinger, and Inkmoth Nexus, and you really need one of those, if not 2, in your opening hand somewhere. And then we've got your pump spells, which are things like Giant Growth or Might of Old Krosa. Now, Giant Growth I've seen cut in a lot of lists, and it's probably the weakest of the pump spells. The other pump spells that you've got are actually much stronger. Your Ranger's Guile and your Vines of Vastwood also act as protection for your creatures, so they do this dual aspect here. And then we've got your lands. Your lands have some utility. Pendelhaven is a great addition to this deck as it gives +1/+2 to your 1/1 creatures, which often means that you can attack a few times between that and your Exalted triggers, even getting through defensive creatures if the game happens to go a little bit longer. The fetch lands are actually really important here. It's tough to cut them because if you draw too much land, that's usually one of your biggest problems, especially in the mirror match, and also in losing games. You really need to have a full hand of as many of these pump spells as you can. One play tip here is that when playing against hand destruction, you may actually want to lower the number of cards in your hand by playing out some of your pump spells earlier to get a few poison counters on, and rely on the Inkmoth Nexuses, which I strongly recommend having 4 of, as a way to get through your last few points of damage. There's a lot of synergy in this deck. You've got both the Cathedral of War and Noble Hierarch that add Exalted, and then you've got things like Blighted Agent and Inkmoth Nexus that have wonderful evasion to get through your opponent's cards. This deck also has the best protection spell out there. The Phyrexian mana on this makes it very easy to cast. You're often not too worried about your life total. And note here that this gives you protection from your choice of colors or from artifacts. So this is an incredible spell even against some of the artifact-based decks out there. I was playtesting this against Urzatron the other day and only realized it partway through. A Wormcoil Engine is by no means a good blocker against something like Apostle's Blessing, and when playtesting against Soul Sisters, this card was a crushing. Being able to slide by your opponent's white creatures or monocolored creatures is just great. Also, be familiar that you can actually do regular damage in this deck. Noble Hierarch with a few Exalted triggers can add up to 10 damage pretty quickly, and when your opponents see you're playing Infect, they start not paying attention to their life at all. They'll go grab their fetch lands, bring them into play untapped, and not worry about their normal life total. I've had at least 2 games where I've been able to win with a Noble Hierarch, a few Exalted Triggers, and some pump spells on it, even after my opponent had drawn an amazing amount of removal, removing all of my Infect creatures. Be aware of this secondary win condition out there. The other thing that you want to think about a lot is how much consistency versus power. The deck lists that I've seen tend to run about 21 land currently. If you want to take some risks, you can cut down the land a little bit, add some Gix probes, get a little more information about your opponent, have a little bit higher chance of drawing into a powerful hand. I personally like the 21 land count. I think it's really good, but I have seen people gamble with 20 or even 19 land and some additional spells in there to bring up the consistency of drawing spells. The good matchups for this deck is anything that tries to win really after turn 4. Control is often not prepared for this particular matchup. Scapeshift decks that win on turn 4 or turn 5 are just too slow, and an Urzatron deck, even if it's got the ability to draw Karn on turn 3, they must do it, or you can often kill them on turn 3. So any of the slower decks, even Jund, you've got a pretty good matchup, with the exception of when they start playing Lingering Souls. Liliana of the Veil and Lightning Bolts aren't that big of a deal, but your rough matchups come in when they've got a significant number of blockers and a significant number of removal, or if their particular combo goes off on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. There really aren't any turn 1 combo kills right now, but there are some chances for turn 2s and turn 3s with Eggs and with Niv Magus Elemental. Also, something like an Izzet Staticaster can be a huge pain for this deck. It's something you've got to watch out for. If you run into a situation where somebody is siding them in, then you've really got to go for a faster kill and kind of rearrange your strategy a bit, or go for some hand destruction early on. One of the nice parts about this particular build is the focus on black, because black gives you a lot more options in the sideboard. For other combo decks, Thoughtseizes and Inquisitions of Kozilek are incredibly good for dealing with other combo decks. Dark Blast is just incredible in the mirror match and against some creature decks. Abrupt Decay is also a decent sideboard card. Nature's Claim I really love, because you don't care about giving them life, and it's great against both artifacts and enchantments. Spellskite is also a pretty good way to distract your opponent's lightning bolts. Hurkyl's Recall I kind of like in there, especially against robots. The Corruptor I'm a little bit less excited about, but it does give you another Infector. The sideboard, though, has a lot of flexibility, but I would definitely put in at least some Inquisitions or Thoughtseizes and a Dark Blast or 2 and some way to deal with artifacts. For further reading on this, I definitely recommend checking out Star City Games. They've got a really good article that was up in November on how to play this deck, which is where this particular deck list came from. And MTG Daily has also had some really good articles over Infect that go over the basic strategy and intro points to it. Thanks. This has been Brian Rowe with a modern Infect deck tech. Hopefully people do well out there at the Pro Tour qualifiers. If you have any success from this deck, please let me know. Thanks. Or ideas on how to improve it.